Childhood begins and ends with bubbles. We spend our summers blowing our innocence into the wind, and while some people's bubbles deflate slowly, others aren't so lucky, and theirs explode all at once. Because sometimes the life lets the air out of our bubbles in little bursts, like when we discover who really brings our Christmas presents, or that the good guys don't always win. But other times, it's a hole blown straight through our hearts that shatters all our bubbles in one terrifying pop. This is a story about one of those bubble popping moments, for a girl, for a friend, for a family. This is Grace's story. They dated for months before they even kissed, and I still remember Grace calling me and talking late into the night about how their first kiss made her feel like she was flying, and how every first after that was like a gust of wind that sent her soaring higher and higher into the clouds. Then suddenly, it was like she had won. Her nosedive started with a party in late January, and she came to school the next day with bruises on her cheeks and baggy sweatpants. She told everyone she fell on the ice outside, and even though everyone believed her, I knew better. It took me weeks to find out what happened that night, and I remember watching as she slowly withdrew from the world and began to hide within herself. I watched as her eyes got darker, like a storm brewing inside was blocking out the sun. Until one Sunday, she came over in all black that matched the circles under her eyes and cast shadows across her pale skin. And I sat there as she wrung her hands and told me about the time that wasn't like the others, how it hurt, and she wasn't quite sure why. I remember how my stomach hit the floor and the room spun around me, because school doesn't teach you what to say to someone when they tell you they've been raped. She hid her eyes behind her hair as she told me about that night in one long breath, letting it all spill out at once, because when your body's throwing up poison, it's hardly concerned with your ability to breathe. She tells me how they were laying there kissing, and then suddenly he was on top of her. She shakes as she explains how he wouldn't stop. And before she could move, her pants were off, and he was smiling. I pull her in tight and let her cry as she tells me how she tried to scream, but his hand over her mouth was too strong. She says her skin feels like it's burning, and it doesn't matter how many times she showers. And I sit there with my fists clenched and my eyes running when she tells me how he looked at her when he was done, how his face slipped into a frown when he apologized, and how his brow crinkled when he told her that she wanted it, that she'd asked for it, and that no one would believe her if she told them. And I want to strangle him when she tells me how he had the gall to lean over and whisper, "I love you," in her ear when he left. But I don't. Instead, I let her cry and I tell her I believe her, and that it isn't her fault. But mostly, I sit there silently because I don't know what you're supposed to say to someone when the people they love betray them. Because society teaches us that it's a man lurking in a dark alleyway, or someone at a bar that spikes our drinks and drags us to their car. They teach us to be afraid of strangers and the unknown, but what they don't teach us is that 96% of the time, it's not the strangers we need to worry about. She held her breath that night as he clamped his hand over her mouth, and she says it feels like she hasn't been able to catch it since. Her secret wove itself along the black and blue marks on her skin and squeezed the life out of her through the cracks in her ribs. And all I can do is watch as it consumes her silently, like radiation slowly destroying her from the inside out as she struggles to survive. She wears clothes that conceal her in the hopes that no one will discover what she's carrying inside, but I've caught a glimpse of the slashes on her wrists that she tucks beneath her sleeves. She tells me she doesn't remember who she used to be before she was raped, that when she sees herself in old photos, it's like she's looking at a ghost, because the little girl she was before is dead. And I sit silently at school as I watch her body stiffen and her eyes glaze over when someone trips into her. She struggles to breathe, to remember that whatever she's seeing isn't happening. And I know she started missing third period so she doesn't have to see him. I find myself wondering why no one told me that PTSD isn't just caused by war zones, or that some people starve themselves just so they have something to control. And I can't figure out why I wasn't taught that there are so many people out there feeling this alone. But I finally figured out that she needs help, a kind that I haven't been trained to give. So we circle the block 5 times, each time a little slower than the last. And finally, on the 6th lap, we pull into her driveway. I notice her hand shaking as she cuts the ignition and the way she takes deep breaths to steady herself before she opens the door. She's going to tell her parents, and I promised I would be there when she does. We're silent throughout dinner, and eventually her mother notices how we've done nothing but push food around on our plates. You can feel the weight of the silence that descends upon us as her secret floats off her shoulders and drapes itself over the room. I don't remember ever seeing her dad cry, but I know there are tears in his eyes as he puts his head in his hands. And her mother isn't so modest as she sobs into her husband's chest. But no one notices when her brother balls up his fists and storms out of the house. And I can't help but close my eyes too, because for the first time in months, it seems like things could finally start looking up for Grace. And I think that if I squint hard enough, I can see the blue sky peeking out behind the clouds. But I open my eyes, and I realize that it's no longer silent. Her mother is yelling at her father for letting her go to the party, and you can see the guilt transforming into rage as it creeps up her father's body and turns his face red. They aren't mad at Grace. They're mad at themselves. But none of that matters if she still thinks it's her fault. The next day at school, everyone fusses over the boy with a broken nose and a bruised face. But no one knows what's happened to him. He doesn't want to share. And when I see her brother later that night and I notice the bruises on his knuckles and the cuts just above his eye, I bite my tongue. Grace is trying to convince herself that they're even now, that his broken nose is hurting him just as much as he hurt her, because she knows this is the only justice she's going to get. But soon, all evidence of the incident is gone and Grace is still suffering. And all I can do is watch as she clenches her teeth and sets her jaw to keep from lashing out when he brags to his buddies that he got some. The rumors spread like a disease, and soon everyone knows. I want to scream as people curse at her in the hallways and glare daggers into the back of her head as she passes by. I almost cry when I see the boys taunting her, saying that she's used goods and that no one will want her. I throw up when I hear a teacher mutter how she ruined that poor boy's reputation. But I lose it when the paper prints an article saying she led him on, that she shouldn't have been alone with him, that she shouldn't have had on such a short party dress, that she shouldn't have tempted him. It's been a year, and Grace is still struggling to catch her breath, to keep her head above the ocean of lies. And every time you call her a slut or tell her she could have prevented it, you are forcing her back into the dark depths of an ocean that she has fought so hard to escape. Because while she's drowning, you're pushing her head back down. And people seem to forget that you can only hold your breath for so long before your body stops needing air. Now, I'm sorry if this seems sanctimonious or judgmental, but I'm telling it because society has decided that it's easier to blame Grace than it is to explain why her boyfriend thought it was acceptable to rape her. They tell girls to cover up, to avoid that part of town, and to watch their drinks. instead of turning to boys and teaching them how important consent is. They don't tell you that Grace's story isn't an anomaly, that she is one of hundreds of thousands of women they are trying to pretend don't exist. These women are sitting in this room tonight, living proof of a statistic that no one seems to care about. A statistic that says 1 in 5 women will be raped at some point in their lifetime. So I'm telling you this with the hope that if you know that these women are your classmates, your sisters, your daughters, your friends, that maybe you will want to help them. Because Grace is tired of being told to scream, only to find out that no one is listening. She's tired of the excuses, and she's tired of the way that no one seems to care about any of this unless it's happened to them. But mostly, she's just so very tired of living in a world that teaches us, don't get raped, instead of don't rape.